In this session, we're going to be doing an overview of Resource Manager, where we're looking at purchase orders, purchase receipts, PO invoices, and AP invoices, as well as AP payment requisitions. Now, given the time frame that we have for presentations, I probably won't get to AP invoices and AP payments in this session. I'll be able to show you very briefly, but in order to maintain a little bit of control over the time that we're using for the session, I'll focus a lot on the PO because that tends to be a little bit more involved. So in terms of Resource Manager, as I mentioned in the last session, it creates an employee portal that integrates directly into Sage 300. So it's an additional portal using web applications or mobile apps, just like CRM and Sage web screens. So the idea is that we want to incorporate employee activities into Sage 300 seamlessly without rekeying any of that information. And as we talked about, we have an ESS portal and we have mobile apps for Android and Apple devices that we can use to incorporate purchase activities for non-Sage 300 users, typically people who would not be logging in, and you don't want them logging into Sage 300. You want to protect the integrity of Sage 300 by having operations people or different non-financial accounting people entering these POs, but not having to log into Sage 300 to do that. So it's a hybrid solution that combines a Windows or web screen back office module in Sage 300 with the portal. And as we touched on, we want to create a system that's totally integrated to the mobile apps without any rekeying or import-export required, updating Sage 300 in real time, using email alerts to make sure people are aware of what's going on, and using workflow approvals to ensure that only approved transactions get set up in Sage 300. So these documents that are being raised, whether they're PO requisitions or AP invoices, they're going to get routed for approval by the appropriate people based on how you've structured your workflow, and then and only then does it update Sage 300. So as we touched on before, Resource Manager is a very comprehensive application module with multiple types of transactions. We're going to be focusing on the e-purchasing today and possibly the AP request. We've just reviewed time management. Last week we did the expense reports, but there's also project management and other types of requisitions that we can support in the system. So our focus here is e-purchasing, where we can raise requisitions around purchases, so POs and PO requisition entry. Also, we can manage PO receipts and do approvals around PO receipts as well as PO invoices. And again, the ESS portal will show you those icons on the screen if you've licensed those applications within Sage 300 and Resource Manager. And what we've added recently is request for quote capability. So as part of the purchase process, you can enforce that at least 2 quotations are part of the procurement process so that you're ensuring you're getting the best price or the best delivery terms based on what the most important criteria is. You can also control purchasing against PJC estimates and budgets, as well as GL account budgets. It supports the concept of blanket POs, so you can set up POs and draw them down. There's flexible PO numbering rules that you can use. You can approve these purchases by line item or by the entire purchase document. And there's an endorsement feature as part of the request for quote, where you can have preferred vendors that you typically buy from. And the tax amount that applies can be calculated as part of the purchase process. When we incorporate purchase receipt processing, we will allow you to over-receive. So even if the PO says 50 items and you receive 52, you can put a tolerance on the receipt so that you'll allow up to 10% over receiving if that's something you want to incorporate as part of the system. And then that will be part of the approval process as well. Same thing for PO invoices. If you want to go to that level and approve PO invoices, then you can also incorporate a workflow approval around the PO invoice. So let's jump over to the live demo now and take a look at how you would incorporate purchase transactions within Resource Manager that link directly to Sage 300. So you'll see there's a number of different kinds of requisitions that we have We're going to be focusing on purchase requisitions today. So I want to touch on again a few of the setup options that we have within the system to give you an idea of the functionality that's supported within Resource Manager. So note at the beginning here, when we're talking about configuring purchase requisitions, if we want to incorporate a workflow, we can. It is possible to just have people enter purchases with no workflow approval, and they'll get updated directly from the portal into Sage 300. So it's like a web screen access without logging into Sage 300. And because the user licenses are less expensive in our portal, it's an inexpensive way for people to capture and enter POs or AP invoices without having to log into Sage 300. I touched on the fact that we can approve at a detail line level or a document level, and you can choose to create PO requisitions or purchase orders within Sage 300. And then you can use vendor price from IC vendor or PO vendor details. So we're not assuming that you have to have inventory control. And then you can choose the numbering around your requisitions. And here's the quality or quantity tolerance around PO receipts. So that can either be a percentage or amount for receipt quantity or receipt amount, or quantity or quantity and amount. So lots of different options there for how you configure. Now what we do in the system is we allow you to create a catalog of items with pictures. So when we're raising these purchase transactions, we can actually have a picture of what we're buying pop up on the screen. The purchase types will determine what we want to buy and who we want to buy it from. So remember, we're trying to control what non-Sage 300 users can do within the system. So we want to be careful about the access rights that we give them. For example, do we want to force the use of a quotation? And if we do, who do we send that quotation to? A specific vendor or vendor contact? And then we can create an email template to send the message for the quote. Are we buying on behalf of all of our inventory locations or just individual locations? Do we want to allow all items to be part of a particular purchase type, or are we going to restrict that by item number, by item category, or PO vendor or IC vendor details? Do we allow all vendors or just specific vendors to be part of this type of purchase? So these are all options that we have to control what we can buy and who we can buy from, and whether there's a workflow approval around it. Notice as well that we can enable GL account budget checking. So when we're buying against expense accounts or even inventory accounts, we can automatically check that against the GL budget sets that we've set up within General Ledger. And we can notify people by either setting up a warning to say we have gone over budget, or we can stop them from buying when we reach our budget by putting an error condition on it. Or we can also, as a third option, say that if we're going over budget, we need approval for this purchase transaction that might be above and beyond our normal approval workflow process. Okay, so these are all different options that we can incorporate. We can also send notification upon PO creation. And if we turn that on, then we have the option to set up the email address for who we're notifying. So in some cases, as the PO gets approved, you'll want to send an email to the vendor to say, hey, we've approved this PO and we're going to be sending the purchase order to you. So let's go in and look at a couple of different types. We have job related. So that's linking into a PJC job. And then we'll create another one here called budget. And you'll see that we've set up a notification to an internal person as well as a vendor contact. We are requiring quotations on this type of purchase. And we've specified that we can buy against any GL account and all locations, but we're restricting the items. And what we can do is when we choose the items that are allowed on this type of purchase, we can auto insert those items. So you'll see that when I create the purchase requisition from scratch, it will auto populate these line items for me, and then I can delete the ones I don't want on that particular order. And we're allowing all vendors as well. So these are the warnings These are the configuration options that we have, and we've enabled GL budgeting with a warning. So a warning message will pop up when we try to post and approve this purchase using budget control. So those are all the different types of controls that we can put. The same thing holds true for PO receipt and PO invoice, but for time's sake, we'll skip over that for now. I just want to highlight again the approval workflows. So around purchase transactions, we have the option to create PO workflow around the purchase requisition itself, or the PO receipt, or the PO invoice. So if we look at purchase requisitions as an example, there's a basic one-level purchase approval, but in our example today, we're using this PO approval, which is going to route the transaction slightly differently based on the nature of the items that we're buying. So I have my supervisor and my division manager. And if I look at my division manager, the setup that I've got for this particular company is I'm part of division retail, and my division manager is 1003 Reginald. So because of the nature of the items I'm buying, it's going to ask Reginald to participate in the workflow approval for me. And that's because this workflow approval has a decision action. And remember, we talked about this in the last session, that I can put in my own conditions or my own logic on the workflow to ensure that the purchase is meeting my specific policies and procedures for purchasing. So it's telling me that if it's a non-inventory item, then I'm going to ask for a different person to do the approval, and that's going to go to the division manager, not just my supervisor. If it's a standard category, then my supervisor can approve it, but if it's a non-inventory, I need my division manager to approve it. So those are some of the ways that we can customize these workflows to meet exactly the process that you want to follow. And again, we have email as an alert function that gives us the ability to notify managers when things are being approved or purchased against their department budgets. So let's move over to the portal. And in this case, I want to log in as myself. So I'm going to log out as Freddie and log in as myself. Now I've just logged myself into one company, so I don't have the selection list of Sage 300 companies. I'm only working in one company, and I want to raise a purchase requisition in this case. And again, you can see that previously posted purchase requests have been displayed here as history for me on my portal. Things that have been approved, awaiting approval, rejected, and open. When I create a new purchase requisition, I can choose the type if I'm given an option. So I could go from job related to budget, but we're going to use budget. I have the date, and then I have the vendor. So I want to put in the vendor information, and I could put in the location as a header that any inventory that I'm buying is going to be set up. And then I can choose to enter line items if I want. And I want you to notice something, that when I use the drop-down box, this is the list of items that I could use to purchase on this kind of a purchase requisition. And if, for instance, I don't know the item number, but I want a fluorescent desk lamp, then I just start typing in what the description is, and you notice it's got fuzzy logic search. So I don't have to know the item number, even though I'm in the item number column. I can just start typing in the description of the item, and it filters for me down to items that match that description. And then, of course, I could add in that item as part of the workflow. And then notice that the catalog picture is here. So if I'm choosing an item and the location details are assigned, then it will tell me the quantity on hand for that location and all locations, whether I've got anything committed on sales order, what's on PO, what's on purchase request. And the picture from the catalog pops up as well. So all that information can be incorporated. I can also incorporate hyperlinks to websites. So let's say I was buying this from staples.com, then there would be a link to the staples.com website, and I would be able to see the web page or the catalog that I'm buying this from. Okay, so that can all be incorporated as a line item. Now I could have also said fill the default items. Remember, I had a list of default items, and I could say just put them all in there for me. and I want them included as part of this purchase order. And then of course I can attach, I can do quotations, and I could add quotes, request quotes, and there'll be totals. Now, if I'm in the habit of buying the same things on a regular basis, then I can also either import from an external catalog and create a mapping table to map from the catalog into the system, or I can copy from a previous purchase request, and that's down here, copy PR. So I could say I want to take a previous purchase that I made, let's say this one here, number 15, and the requisition date can be today, and I want it to expire by next Thursday, and the date required is next Wednesday. So I'm going to give them 1 day's grace, but I want to make sure that I'm getting this. And then I could include ship via information to say it's coming through Global Freight Service and say okay. And then it populates the details on my purchase requisition. And you can see here that it has the quotation details that I need. So I don't have to go in and set up the items on the purchase requisition. I don't need to go in and set up the quote details, because I know a quote is required and I'm generally quoting from the same vendors. I can see the quotation detail that's been set up previously. Now I could go in and modify this if I wanted to, but this essentially creates a template for all future purchases that I can copy from on a regular basis. And I can see the vendor name and details, the lead time that we generally have, and the price. So you can see in one case, this vendor has a higher price but a shorter lead time. So depending on the criteria that I'm most interested in on this purchase, I would select one or two of these vendors. You can also see the star, which denotes that this is our preferred vendor. So I mentioned that we can endorse certain vendors as our preferred vendors for certain items that we're purchasing. And likewise, I can also see the quote details for this particular vendor and item. And then I can also add a quote if I wanted to add another vendor to this quote, or I could just simply request a quote. And you see I have to identify that and then go ahead and save. So I'm going to go ahead and save this document. And now I can go ahead and request the quote, and it will say, here's the line items. Which ones would you like to include? And you can add a vendor and send off the information based on their email address and who you want to copy to. So all of that is part, excuse me, of the request for quote functionality. And I can check to make sure that I'm validating and meeting the requirements. So if I've said I need 2 quotes in every purchase request, I can check it to make sure that I'm meeting the requirements in the company. And I can also check budget and say, how is this going to impact my budget for the period? And it will show me whether what my budget amount is for this fiscal year and period, what the actual amount is, what the pending amount is on other purchase requests, and what's available. So you can see I'm kind of going over budget in a few of my accounts so far. And then for attachments, you see here that I've added a non-inventory item and entered a price, and I want to put an attachment for that. So I would go in and say, for this particular item, I want to attach a file, and it's called my Jaguar XF sedan, and I browse. And this time I'm going to attach a PDF. So there's my PDF, and I want to save that. And so this is obviously not a typical item that I would be buying, because I would have had to add that unit price. And then I could also add additional details. So I have the catalog here, but I could have added a picture of the desk notepad if I wanted to. Not necessarily required. But if I go over to my pictures and I want to see my saved pictures and I've got the desk pad here, I could add that as another saved document. Okay, and it's highlighted here with the red circle. So now I'm ready to submit this into the workflow. So I go ahead and submit it, and you'll see that I get that warning because I'm over my budget totals. But because I flagged this as a warning and not an error, I can continue through this, even though it says I'm exceeding my expenditure total for this period. So I continue, and it exposes the approval audit trail, and you can see that Bruce has to do the approval. So now I would go ahead and open up the approval for Bruce, and you'll see here, Bruce has his notification on the to approved list to approve this purchase requisition. There's the one we just did, PR20. And I can see that all 3 lines need to be approved. I can see the attachments, so the Jaguar attachment. And I'm okay to do the approval. I can check that the quotations are there. I can also check the budget details and go, oh my goodness, we're way over budget. But I'm going to go ahead and approve it anyways. And it gives me the warning, but then I can continue and say, okay, I would like a drive in your, oh boy, your new Jaguar, okay? And say okay. And off it goes. Now, if it's met all the approval criteria, then it's already set up here in Sage 300 as an approved purchase requisition. So if we go down here, you can see PR20 has been approved. So it's set up as a transaction batch within Sage 300. And now I open up that purchase, and all of the details again that we recorded are here, including the website link for Staples. So I could click on that from in here, and it would take me to the Staples website over here. And if I want to, so ask me later, there's the Staples website, so I can click those links to the websites. I see the attachments here. So my PDF that I saw on the web portal is now accessible through Sage 300 as part of the purchase request. And that will pop up the Jaguar image. There we go. And the approval audit trail is here, the optional fields if I had any, and the requisition details. I also have the budget capability, so I can look at the budget details from Sage 300 and see how I'm doing against budget. And if I'm okay, then I can go ahead and post. And what it will do in this case is it will generate my PO, because on this particular requisition, I'm creating a PO. Okay. Now it could have sent an email to the vendor, but now it's been posted. And if I look at my PO module, I see a transaction detail, which is my requisition on December the 10th, PR20. So we use the reference field as a link back to the original document number, the purchase request in Resource Manager. And I've got my 3 items set up on a purchase order within Sage 300. Now, of course, the normal procedure is to receive against that PO an invoice. And it's up to you whether you would like to incorporate a PO receipt approval. So you could actually go through a PO receipt approval and a PO invoice approval if you'd like as part of your purchase requisition process. We give you those options so that you've got flexibility to do that if you need to. Now, very quickly, in the remaining couple of minutes that I have, if we wanted to do an AP invoice, just to show you this very quickly, this is a way that some clients use Resource Manager to allow non-Sage 300 users to set up their AP invoices. We have a cruise line company that has people out on boats that are raising AP invoices, and they're doing that from the ships for things they need to procure on the ships, and then they send the AP invoice for approval, and then it goes in to Sage 300. And so it's obviously streamlined the process, because when they're buying stuff that needs to get approval, and they're out at sea and they can't generate an AP invoice in Sage 300. So by doing this, they generate that AP invoice through the portal, and then it gets approved and set up in Sage 300 quickly and easily. So again, everything that you see within Sage 300, I can see all my vendors, I can add a document number, INV 620, and then I can choose from my distribution codes. So let's say I am renting equipment, and I would put in the amount, let's say $600, and then I could either enter the tax or calculate the tax, and it will set that up for me. And then I can just go ahead and submit that for approval, and it'll tell me that it's a requisition that I've raised, and in-source already exists for this vendor and amount, so it's checking for duplicates. But again, it's just a warning, and I can go over that warning, and then Bruce is going to do the approval. So it's been submitted into the workflow. So just like you saw with the purchase order, except now it's just an AP invoice. I'll go ahead and approve that AP invoice. That will appear on the to approved list as an AP invoice. There it is there, invoice 620. I can review and approve that. I could transfer it to another manager if for some reason it was unique, but I'm going to go ahead and approve it, say okay, and it heads into Sage 300. So in my AP invoice requisition list, I will see the AP invoice right here for 620, and I can see all the details if I want, including the approval audit trail. I didn't attach a document in this case just for expediency, but I'm okay, and I can just go ahead and post, and it will create the AP invoice. Now, if I want, I could skip this process and just say, once it's been approved, go ahead and set it up in Resource Manager, but post it up to AP. And if I did that, then I wouldn't need to go through that step, but we show you that just so you know you can separate that. And there'll be an AP invoice generated. It'll append to an existing batch, or it will show you a new batch. So here's the AP invoice we created today, December 10th, and there's drill down. So you can drill from AP back into Resource Manager and see all the details, any attachments and the approvals with the document details. Okay, so thank you very much. That concludes our presentation on Resource Manager with PO and AP invoice requisitions. I'll take any questions in closing.
I do have some questions here already. First one is, what happens if there's an error on an approved PO requisition?
Okay, that's a good question. So yes, if there was an error, that's one reason that I show that separate step here within AP invoice. So if there was an error, depending on when you catch the error, you could either modify the AP invoice during the approval process in the portal. That's one thing you can enable. You could reject the invoice and send it back to the employee to make the change. But if it's already gone through the approval process and it happens to be in Sage 300, we still give the finance and accounting people within Sage 300 the right to go in and look at an approved requisition and delete it. So if you give the rights for the user to do that, they could actually delete an approved AP invoice requisition here before it goes up to the AP module. So there's a couple different ways you could manage that.
Do you need inventory control in Sage 300 to use norming Resource Manager PO requisitions?
No, you can use just PO if you want. You don't have to use inventory control items. That's why we give you the option to use PO vendor or IC vendor details when you're looking at making purchases. So no, IC is not a required module to use the PO system of Resource Manager.
Is it possible to scan AP invoices into Resource Manager?
Okay, good question. So in Resource Manager's case, no, we don't actually scan the invoices into Resource Manager. Somebody has to enter the invoice into Resource Manager, and then it gets approved. So this is really, I think, touching on an area around workflow approvals. When you scan a document, you're really approving the document. So it's a document approval. We're doing a transaction approval. So we have to enter the invoice to create the transaction, and then we approve the transaction. So it's a slightly different focus and process. But no, at this point, Resource Manager doesn't support what we call OCR, or optical character recognition. That's something that may be incorporated in the future, but today it's not part of Resource Manager. OCR tends to be quite expensive, and at this point, we've opted not to incorporate it, but it may be something that we incorporate in the future. But thank you for asking that.
The last question I have here is, can the ESS portal user licenses be shared? What happens when a person leaves the company? Do we need to purchase new licenses?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, so these user licenses are, so for instance, Bruce here, you could license Bruce just to do timesheet and expenses, and other people to license just purchase requisitions or do purchase requisitions. And if Bruce were to leave the company, you could transfer his license to a new employee. So you can license the applications by user individually, and you can transfer the licenses to new users if you want to do that. So you don't have to buy new licenses just because you're buying, or just because new employees are being recruited and old employees are leaving. However, if you add employees, then you would just buy new licenses based on the new employees that you're adding. So thank you for asking that, because yeah, we'd get that question a lot about, is it, are we able to transfer licenses? But one thing I should mention here quickly is, in the case of, let's say, AP invoices, you could share the license, but then it's difficult to know who actually entered the AP invoice. So you want to be careful about sharing the licenses from that perspective. Typically, we'd say you want to know who the individual is that actually raised the AP invoice, or PO for that matter. All right, so hopefully that was clear, and thank you for asking that question.
And it does look like that's all the questions that we have for this session. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you, Robert, for presenting today.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.